go, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Fuck Off Squad, Murders, and the currently being kickstarted Night Hunters. It's Dave Baker. Thanks for coming on, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
So, I think it's funny. I talked to you, 4 days ago, and we were both in New York, and now you're in Los Angeles, and I'm in Alaska. Man, if does New York Comic Con already feel like a month ago to you? Dude,
I think Nicole and I were walking into the show Saturday morning, and I was like, "Is this the last day? Have we been here for like a week?" Like that show, that show, and San Diego. Those are the two shows that there are shows that are the same length, but for some reason, man, they both just take it out of you.
Yeah. I mean, Thursday by itself, I went back, and I have grand aspirations of going out and being a social individual, but I got back after dinner and I went and laid on my couch and was in my Airbnb, and I put on a movie on Netflix, and I was like, I don't think I'm gonna move again tonight. I think the next time I move will be to bed, and that's it. And I was a total bum. But sometimes you need time out when you're at cons. They're it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, I wish that I had that level of kind of relaxation at the end of these convention days. It's the life of a cartoonist is so weird, where you spend 99% of your time alone, and then you go to a convention and you're up on your feet all day, hard selling, hey, you want to check out my comic? You want to check out my comic? And then you go out to dinner with a bunch of friends, and it's always a whole kit and caboodle thing where it's 15 people all trying to split one check. and then everybody goes to BarCon afterwards, and then you're doing basically the same thing, except you're hey, I'm employable, hey, I'm employable, hey, I'm employable, to people who may or may not have the ability to give you a job.
Yeah. I mean, that's the difference is for creators, it's so many. I mean, I'm not trying to make it seem like BarCon is a deal making place where everyone's shaking hands and signing contracts and stuff like that, but it is really important. I mean, that's the part is cons for creators is partially selling and partially networking, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to do all, those things either. I'm not standing there in the corner with a, sign that's hire me, please. But it's just, we all love comics, and we all want to make comics, and we all want to be friends with people that we like their comics. So, you go to these bars afterwards, and it's very fun, but it's also, there's a lot of, yelling over martini glasses at each other in a good way. Good way.
Or at least you're at a classy bar. You got the martinis going on. How was New York Comic Con? I do have to ask.
Oh, it was great. I love that convention. It's always a really fun convention for twofold. One, because the Artist Alley this year and the last couple of years have been separate from the show floor. So it's almost like its own convention where you don't have to deal with, the Warner Brothers booth blasting the Justice League trailer every 5 minutes or something. You just can hang out, sell your comic, and the people that are down there theoretically, for the most part, are trying to find cool artists and buy new comics and stuff.
Yeah, I'm always really impressed because it seems like New York Comic Con is the biggest con that still has a substantial part of it that still feels really comic book oriented. And I think I think it's probably because what you're saying is it's always been kind of separated. And I know this was before you guys started going. I'm pretty sure it was, but they used to have it in that weird airplane hangar type thing at the end of the con, and or at the end of the Javits Center, and they've been under construction for forever. But it's it does feel like there's a con within a con. And Artist Alley was particularly busy this year. It seemed nuts.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those years where it's well, I could go refill my water bottle, or I could just stay here and not have to fight through a giant crowd of people.
Yeah. Well, I have you on to talk about Night Hunters. We're going to get to that here in a little bit, but I want to start by talking about, and we discussed this before we got on the air a little bit, but I find what you do to be very interesting because you have all these different hats. You self-publish comics. You have Fuck Off Squad, and you have Action Hospital, and then you have a YA graphic novel coming through Athenium in 2022. Which it's funny. It's I love that those get announced so far out. I was 2022. I'm that is both closer to now than I really care to realize, but also still pretty far away. But you're also like a Wednesday warrior who loves Hickman's X-Men comics. So like those are some interesting like sides to you. Like, do you find it difficult to like balance those sides, or are those all just kind of like complementary sides of your world and kind of what creates like the worldview you have about comics?
I think so. One, I just love comics as a medium. Like I read manga, I read bande dessinée. I really like, floppy Wednesday, superhero comics. I love independent comics. I buy like everything Koyama puts out. I buy like, I got published by Silver Sprocket because I also buy like everything they put out. I read webcomics. I like the medium more so than any genre, and it's always kind of funny to me how people self-divide. Where it'd be like if movie fans were like, I only watch movies made by Miramax. Yeah. It's just really silly to me that so many people, especially in the big two space, where it's like I only read Marvel or I only read DC. And yes, I'm aware of the long legacies that those companies have and why those specific fan bases are so entrenched. I know the history, but it's still really silly to me that somebody would be like, there's all this really great stuff over here, but I'm not going to read it because it's made by a rival corporation.
Yeah.
So to answer your question more pointedly, I love comics, and I like all kinds of comics. And for me, I think I don't necessarily like subdivide that way. So from outside, it may seem like there's all those sides, but I think it's more, I just like every type of comic book. If it's words and pictures put together, I'm interested in the form of comics. I'm interested in the medium. I'm interested in how words and pictures and panels and pages and captions and word balloons and thought balloons, how all those pieces of narrative real estate can be puzzled together and taken apart, and then kind of recombined in different ways. And each one of the like subgenres that you had mentioned, and each one of the subgenres that I had mentioned, like they all bring something cool and new and unique to the medium of comics. And I think that comics is the greatest art form in the history of humanity. And I think it would be really silly not to investigate one corner of it just because it has a specific stylistic or stylistic mandate or is owned by a mega corporation, which has no interest in actually propelling the medium.
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about, though. I actually only watch DreamWorks animation movies. Like, that's exclusively what I watch. I say that, but I actually am, like, weirdly a huge stan for the How to Train Your Dragon movies. So there you go. But I don't know. I mean, it is interesting how comics has that, where it's like, it's not just amongst the fans. Like, I feel like to a certain degree, and I mentioned this before we started recording, it's like, you take somebody like Ed Piskor, who did X-Men Grand Design, which is, a huge swing one way or another, no matter how you feel about the book ultimately. But it's like when I had him on the podcast, we talked about how like there's almost like a divide, like how his like indie friends, like his Fantagraphics friends felt about him doing an X-Men book. And like some of them, were a little like weirded out by it. It's like, it's a little different. It's not exactly what they expect from him. But I don't know. I'm totally with you. It's just like, why self-limit? Like, we're in 2019 when we have like this amazing era of like web comics and, young readers comics and et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's so many different ways you can create or so many different genres, so many different storytellers and everything like that. Trying to limit yourself would be like self-defeating almost.
I mean, the Piskor analogy is interesting because I feel like that is not actually somebody being upset. I mean, and I don't know the specific people he was referencing.
Sure.
But I'm just going to extrapolate on that and think, I don't think that those people are actually upset that he's making a superhero comic. It's that he's working in a work for hire system.
Oh,
that
sure.
Objectively probably is not affording him the rights that he deserves. But Ed is a very smart man, and I'm sure that he is going into that with eyes wide open and specifically doing it to broaden his fan base in a very specific way. I don't know that. I'm just
conjecture. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud of that. Seems like the whole Martin Scorsese one for them, one for you method of making films, where you make something that's a bit more commercial and then you make something that's a little safer and guaranteed to have return on investment so that your career can have a type of longevity that probably wouldn't be afforded to someone who is exclusively making auteur art house films.
Right.
That's what that situation looks like to me. But again, I don't know. I'm just kind of speaking out my ass.
Well, it is really interesting because it's like, I don't know. I guess there's like the idea that it's like maybe fans could put somebody into like a specific box. It's like if you only like self-published comics or something like that, maybe people will be like, oh, he's like the indie guy or something. But it's like, I don't know. I mean, I just think it's interesting how fandom works and how like that could lead to people putting you in one specific space that you might not necessarily find yourself in. I mean, like one of the things I found really interesting when I was researching this podcast or researching for this interview is you really love Todd McFarlane. And I've talked to you at a con like multiple times, and I've never would have been like, this is a dude who really loves Todd McFarlane. And like, I love that. I think that's great. Yeah,
I'm a massive Todd McFarlane nerd. I think on multiple fronts. One, I like the level of the like feverish attention to detail and the immense force of will that you can feel in his drawings. Like, he may have wonky anatomy sometimes, and he may sometimes have kind of perspective that doesn't really work, and sometimes his stylistic and tonality inclinations aren't necessarily something that I always gravitate towards, but I, without fail, love the effort that he's putting in. Todd McFarlane is somebody who draws like his life depends on it. Mm-hmm. And I think the medium would be better if everybody did that. And that doesn't mean that you have to draw like him in terms of I got to put every little crack in this weird brick that I'm doing in this brick wall or something. I just mean like Todd McFarlane in every instance is the peak Todd McFarlane. He's always trying to be the best Todd McFarlane he can be. And is he ever going to be somebody like, Vladimir Nabokov? Probably not. But he's the best Todd McFarlane, goddammit. He's out there and he's doing it. And I respect that. I also respect that Todd McFarlane has enough kind of chutzpah to, at the end of the day, he bets on himself 9 times out of 10. And that, I mean, I just respect that so much. Mm-hmm. I respect that so much. I'm sure as you know, but maybe the listeners don't know, I put together a series of anthologies that were kind of deconstructing comics. So I did one called Shitty Watchmen, where me and 10 of my friends all redrew Watchmen page for page, panel for panel, just really poorly. And one where we did Dark Knight Returns, page for page, panel for panel, just really poorly. The goal being to examine the mechanics of comics and what happens when you strip these kind of iconic tomes of the craft of illustration. How does the narrative mechanics of a 16-panel grid and a 9-panel grid communicate to the viewer without the actual like rendering of a fist or something?
Right.
And the third book I almost published, but then I couldn't bring myself to do it because I wasn't 100% sure that Todd wouldn't be upset at me, because I was going to do Good Spawn. Oh, no. I was going to do like that first issue of Spawn number 1, but with all of the words taken out of the word balloons and just like really inspirational or iconic or kind of important quotes, like business quotes from Todd McFarlane put in all the word balloons.
Oh my God.
But I wouldn't want him to be upset. I couldn't take it if Todd McFarlane was upset at me.
Now I'm like deeply fascinated as to whether or not like how he would react to that. Like it would be so interesting.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like on a good day he would be like, oh, this book is great. Oh, I love this book. This is awesome.
Oh my God. I love that you're impersonating him like that, because I interviewed him. I did this big feature for The Ringer a few years ago on like Image's like 25th anniversary and how it all came together. And I interviewed Todd for it. And like, first off, hell of a nice guy. Second off, one of my favorite interview moments ever was when I called in and like his like assistant answered the phone and then she was like, "Oh, I'll put you through." And despite the fact that an assistant connected me, he pretended to be, I think, like a plumbing service for like 2 full minutes. and I was just like, he is really committed to this bit. But I guess that ties into what you were saying about like he is always going to be the most Todd McFarlane he can be. And in that moment, I was just like, this is amazing. This guy is great.
I mean, look, like I said, I just respect his dedication to being himself so much. Like, I just love it, man. Like did you watch that episode of The Blueprint, that web series that Complex puts out?
No.
Homie. highly recommended.
Is it McFarlane?
Yes, dude.
Oh my God.
So if you're not familiar, Complex is like a hip hop magazine.
No, I know Complex. I didn't know that. Why is Todd McFarlane in a Complex? I guess I could see it maybe, but
so they have a web series called The Blueprint where they interview movers and shakers in different types of industry. You know, record producers, movie directors, entrepreneurs who've started businesses. You know, you name it. If they've made a shitload of money, they'll send a guy to interview him and, you know, put it up on the internet for like 15 views or whatever. But man, the episode with Todd McFarlane, he's like in his studio drawing on his Cintiq, just like yelling at the interviewer, just like, "You gotta make it sexy. Just I was the only one who would think about making it sexy." And I just love it. I mean, obviously problematic language aside, like I just love that he's just so himself, and I respect that. I respect it.
Well, you know, I mean, like, you know, not to make this like the Todd McFarlane podcast that we didn't know we always wanted to do, but I mean, I do think it's really interesting. Like, you look back at like the Image founders, and then you look at like Todd McFarlane. He's like the only one that never went back because he found a way to do what he wanted to the absolute max, and he's made like a career and success out of it. And like I mean, honestly, it's like a lot of the 90s guys, like the Image founders and everything like that, I respect them because they did them in like in the most maximum sort of way, like you noted. And Todd has done a lot of different things, but he's always brought his own energy to it, and it's hard not to respect that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny that Todd McFarlane got, I mean, I'm sure everybody that's listening to this knows this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway because I love it. Everybody made fun of Todd McFarlane for spending $2 million on that Mark McGwire ball, myself included. I was like, that is some stupid shit. Why are you spending $2 million on a baseball? And then he took it on a tour throughout every Major League Baseball stadium, and he, in the rider, got to meet the owner of the team, or the general manager, one of them, I don't remember which, and got to do batting practice in every stadium in a custom jersey. And he parlayed those connections that he made through that tour into signing every team up to do action figures with McFarlane toys.
Hell yeah.
So that $2 million turned into who knows how much money.
Yeah, and he's also doing other sports, so it probably spread from there too.
Yeah.
McFarlane always
awesome.
always thinking.
And I don't really know if he bought that ball with that plan in mind. That I kind of feel like that's all these like happy accidents, you know, like that's kind of what life is you just try your best and you end up in situations, and then you have enough faith in yourself to, you know, put your hand up and say, "Oh, I can do that." And I'm sure that Todd was in some jacuzzi with some general managers somewhere after some baseball game, and they're like, "Man, we really wish we could get toys of, you know, whoever, you know, was insert baseball player here." And Todd was like, "Wow, I could do that." And then he has all these toys. It's amazing.
It is
amazing.
Good
for you, Todd. Good for you.
Well, so I you know, related to Todd McFarlane, I do think that like one of the underlying things about him that's really admirable is the fact that he's just doing comics his own way. He's doing business his own way, and like in a lot of ways that's kind of what you're doing. Like you have, you know, we talked about before, you actually do some screenwriting on the side, or actually is your main job, but you also like do comics because you love it. Like, do you find that it's like part of your goal as a comic creator to always kind of stick to like the types of stories that you want to tell and like to like live up to like what your expectations for comics are? Or is that, you know, is it a situational thing? Like if something came up, you might flex for that. Does it make any sense?
Do you mean like, am I Yeah, I'm not quite sure
Well, I
what that
mean,
means.
because like you're doing comics your own way. You have your Kickstarter for Night Hunters. You do self publishing. You even did like a Star Trek Waypoint story. I mean,
Hmm.
I guess my question is like, is it a preference to kind of focus more on like the self publishing stuff, or is that part of your goal? Like, I guess I'm just trying to like see is this all part of like a design, or is it like you know what I'm saying? I mean, like, or
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
do
I
you
think
ultimately want to like do like is for hire something you're interested in, or is it just like this is your path because you've chosen as your way?
that's interesting. I think for a long time, like every person in comics, I just wanted something that I didn't have to fight uphill for. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to submit something blindly to a publisher and have them publish it so I wouldn't have to spend money, so I wouldn't have to go on the road, so I wouldn't have to format InDesign files, so I wouldn't have to deal with trying to get Comics Press to cover my shitty independent self-published book. You know what I mean? Like I wanted a break.
Right.
And the only way you get those breaks is by going out on the road and self-publishing and formatting InDesign files and bugging all those, Comics Press to cover your shitty independent self-published comic. Like, I think if you're asking like what the ultimate goal is,
Sure.
I guess the ultimate goal is I want to keep making the comics that I think are cool. And I guess the self-publishing thing comes in. I publish with my partner, Nicole Gu, and I think we've put out like 12 books or so. The last one of which just came out at Small Press Expo a couple weeks ago. It's a Risographed collection of a bunch of comics that I draw on planes. So whenever we're going to and from conventions, I make like little 3-panel strips about this character named Professor Cuties. And they're kind of the high concept is it's about a diminutive college professor who falls on hard times and then has to move into a 1-bedroom apartment with an anthropomorphic rabbit woman and a super intelligent piece of mud. So, it's not necessarily that similar to anything else I do either, which I guess that's kind of all. I think that's the goal. I think I want ultimately to have a body of work which is all singular and not iterative versions of itself.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, totally. I mean that's the interesting thing is like when I was looking throughout all the stuff you've done, it's like, you read, I like, this is no slander to like Tom King, but if I like got a Tom King comic, I would know it's a Tom King comic. And it's like your stuff largely doesn't always feel like exactly the same in a positive way. And it's interesting because it's like, I don't know. I mean, I just find it to be very admirable, but at the same time, it's just like, I guess when I was looking at it as an outsider, I was trying to figure out, was this by like specifically by design, like you get restless telling the same types of stories over and over, or is it more you just follow what feels right at the time?
I think it's something like I'm a very analytical person and I like to break things apart and see how they work and put them back together. And after I've done that, and I've broken something apart and then put it back together and it still runs, then I kind of, not that I get bored, but then I just look for the next thing. I'm like, oh, what's something else that I can take apart and do again? Like I like a lot of 3-panel strips. Like I learned to read and got initially interested in comics from the Sunday comics, but since then I've really grown away from that type of comic book. I'm more interested in, full page, multi-panel illustrations than necessarily either a 2-tiered or a single-tiered paneled strip. And I was thinking about like, well, what can I do that doesn't, because comics take fucking forever, man. They're so hard.
Yeah.
They're so hard. And like, I was looking for something quick and easy, and I was also looking for something that would be very distinct from everything else I do. And that's why I came up with the design parameter of, okay, I'm only going to draw these when I'm on a plane. And then I'm only going to do 3-paneled strips because that way I can't use any of my normal tricks, for lack of a better term. I have to examine this specific modality of comic and turn it on its ear and then turn it this way and then flip it over and be like, how does this work over here? Does my normal three shitty puns. Do they work in this environment? No. Oh, I guess I have to figure something else out.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's interesting because it's like kind of, I mean, it seems like all this stuff is like experimentation that's actually pushing you in a lot of really interesting ways. Although I do have to say, it is funny that you mentioned about, you know, like the strips and everything like that, and how like strips seem like they went away for a while, but I feel like they're like coming back in such a substantial way. I mean, there was like an entire like thing on the con floor at New York Comic Con that was just for the Far Side. Like, because the Far Side is coming back. I don't know if you know this, but Gary Larson is making the magic happen.
Yeah, Twitter informed me that the Far Side is coming back.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah, I'm the form that I've been thinking about a lot recently is adventure strips like the Phantom or Terry and the Pirates or Secret Agent X9 or any of those kind of like 50s, 60s, 40s serialized adventure strips, because they're so distinct and they have such a specific cadence to them, and I don't quite understand how anybody reads them in any enjoyable format other than a giant tome.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're just so, especially Terry and the Pirates is so lavishly illustrated and such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work. But at the same time, if I was reading that like day to day, that would be so hard. They're not like satisfying in any way.
Yeah.
In bite-sized form, you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously Milton Caniff is like on the Mount Rushmore of comics. Like, obviously I'm not trying to, hot take Milton Caniff sucks. No, that's not what I'm saying. I've been thinking about that a lot recently. Just, I don't know, because this is what I think about.
Like, how do you make it like satisfying as like a single thing while also being like kind of long form? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. I've been kind of pondering that specifically because, there's so much cool, weird innovation happening right now in the digital space and with mobile comics and Webtoon and Tapas and all of these places that they really need you to have a bite-size installment of story while still at Webtoon less so, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They're very similar to that old style of strip where it's a single page which both needs to be independent of the larger whole and a piece of the larger whole. They're like Schrodinger's comics. They both are and are not, a singular entity.
You know what the amazing thing is, though, is like I think actually a lot of creators actually struggle to do that with like single issues while also existing as part of a larger arc. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's like a problem no matter what. It like expands and retracts depending on the size of the actual comic, because it's, like one of the big problems these days, or not necessarily a problem, but a lot of people write for trade. But then when you read the single issues, it's just like sometimes like the comics actually meander a little bit. But I mean that can be a problem if you read single issues, or you could just read for trade, I guess. But
yeah, it's an issue that we've been struggling with as a medium since like the mid 2000s, right?
Right.
Because Bendis was like a big turning point, and then everybody's been kind of trying to play that game and make a graphic novel length book work in 20-something page increments, which is very hard.
Yeah.
And most times, from my perspective, not particularly successful.
Yeah.
It's a weird, reading floppy comics in the direct market is not always a great experience.
No, definitely not. But let's talk about your new project, Night Hunters. I'm going to do a whole spiel on this. This is longer than usual, but it's your new 4-issue dystopian cyberpunk comic you're doing with artist Alexis Ziritt. Ziritt, right? Yeah, okay. That you're currently kickstarting. Here's my read on what it's about. I love the concept. It's about a pair of childhood friends who end up on opposite sides of an ongoing conflict in Venezuela in 2131, and it's a country in which you're either a cop or you're nothing. As one of the friends fights to keep his family alive while also fighting for a better future, and the other seemingly fights to survive as a member of an anti kind of cyborg gang, basically.
Yeah. It's the way I've been pitching it is usually like in Venezuela in the near future, it's a police state, literally, meaning if you want to have a baby in a hospital, if you want to own property, or if you want to run for public office, you have to have been or currently be a police officer. And so the book follows two brothers or adopted brothers, one who becomes a police officer and one who becomes a drug dealer in an anti-cyborg gang.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea. I've always had like this weird affinity for cyberpunk ever since I played Shadowrun when I was a kid on the Super Nintendo. Which like, it's funny how like you have these weird formative experiences when you're a child, even though you like at the time have no idea what cyberpunk is. But what was the origin of this idea? And did part of it stem from just basically wanting to work with Alexis? Because it feels very Alexis.
Yeah, so Alexis and I have been friends for years. Obviously, I love his artwork. I think he's amazing. And we had been talking about doing something for a little while, and we'd bounced back and forth on a couple ideas. And then he was like, I think I want to do a cyberpunk thing. And I want it to be set in Venezuela, and I think I have some characters. And he showed me some character designs.
Wow.
And the main character from our book, Sombra, or Julian, the brother who becomes a police officer, the character with the hood and one eye, he had that character design, and he was like, I don't really know what it's about yet, but I feel like this is the main guy.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of bounced it back and forth for a while, and he was drawing lots of paramilitary guys and lots of dudes with cyborg arms, and that really got me thinking about like, what if the world is an Alexis Ziritt world, and he's populating it with all of these, kind of neo-fascist, police state iconography, what story kind of weaves in between those things, and what kind of wraps that all up in a thematic bow, as it were? And that's kind of where the idea came of like, oh, it needs to be a police state where everyone has to be a police officer, and if this guy's all largely cyborg, well, how did he get there? What happened to him before he became largely cyborg? Which then kind of informed the like favela backdrop of him ostensibly being this kind of like street urchin with his dad and adopted brother living off of rats and whatever kind of money they can kind of gather by harvesting old parts from junkyards and selling them to kind of like junk heap landlord type guys. And so the book really grew organically out of one, talking with Alexis about what he wanted to draw and what, because Alexis is from Venezuela. So we talked a lot about, his life there and the kind of the differences between Venezuela and America and what he wanted the story to kind of be. And I then kind of wrapped all that up in like a Paul Verhoeven bow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, all right, and now there's going to be a weird social political commentary and anti-police sentiment, and let's do this.
I just have to say, like, when I was reading interviews with you about this, one of the things that I really loved was the fact that, you had the Verhoeven like influence with RoboCop was a specifically cited one. But the other one, which I was really impressed by, was Death Burger. I love Death Burger.
Dude, I was, I don't know, I wouldn't say that I know him, but I sent him the Kickstarter, just as like hey, I thought you might like this. And, he responded, this looks great. I gotta back it. I love Alexis's work. And I was like,
oh my God, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Papa Cyberpunk Senpai, he noticed me.
That's amazing. Yeah. Like when I saw it, it was funny because it does, I think that's one of the things I like the most about what you have shown so far on the Kickstarter, and everything about it is like, obviously the story is going to be very interesting, and I'm into all of that, but it has, this is like a weird thing to say, but go with me on it. Like, not every comic has an inherent vibe. Sometimes comics just feel like comics, and like that's a good or bad thing depending on the comic. But there's just like a real vibe to this project, and that was one of the things when you first sent it to me. I was just like, I feel this. Like, it feels like, and the funny thing is like when I first looked at it, I was like, this feels like a Death Burger or like piece kind of fully like blown out in some ways.
Yeah, I think I would put it like, there are a lot of technicians in comics. There are a lot of people who are very good at being a specific type of cog or gear. There are a lot of very talented colorists who know how to color things in a very specific commercial way. There are a lot of artists who know how to draw a building, and you're like, fuck, that's an amazing building that looks like a standard ass building that I would see in the real world.
Right.
And Alexis is a fucking auteur, man.
Yeah.
Like his work all has such a vibrancy and such a immediacy to it. Like he's like the Roger Deakins of bootleg ass bullshit. Like
that is like the most amazing analogy I've ever heard. I love it.
He is though. Like for a long time I used to call his artwork like Tijuana Bible Kirby, because it looks like it fell off of the back of a truck from an alternate dimension, where you pick up the book and you read it and you're like, what the fuck is this? This is amazing. How have I not been following this person's entire career?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is obviously like some weird movie that then got turned into a shitty licensed book that then got lost on a pallet for 50 years. And now we're reading it. Like all of his work just has such an intensity to it. And that's what I really liked about the book that he did with Black Mask, Space Riders, is that book just didn't feel like anything else on the stands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's my goal for this book. I really want, I loved Tarantula. I loved Space Riders. I loved Space Riders 2, but I really wanted to make like the best Alexis comic that was ever made. And I really wanted to like build an apparatus that would showcase his storytelling sensibilities to the maximum. You know, like those big cityscapes, those urban, you know, gaping maws of like, you know, people with robot arms, and they're hauling trash compactor things, and there's, you know, pacing police officers with rifles that have scopes on them that have like laser sights training on citizens as they're just trying to walk through the day. Like that's what I want the whole thing to be when it's complete. Is just like if you took Blade Runner 2049 and shoved it sideways into a Dayglow nightmare. Like that's what I want.
Yeah.
And you know, hopefully we make it happen.
I love it. Well, you know, it's funny. So bringing this full circle to your publisher, the place that I actually bought Space Riders was Floating World Comics in Portland, Oregon.
Hey,
yeah.
Shout out to Jason. But I mean, I'm a big fan of Floating World. Floating World in a city that has a ton of good shops. Floating World is my favorite. It's like the place that I always go when I go to Portland, besides like a million restaurants. But so you're working with them. They're like the publishing arm of the Portland comic shop. They're publishing, distributing, and marketing the book. What made them the right fit for this? Like, did you guys have them in mind as you were putting this together, or was it just kind of like how it worked out? Alexis and I had been working on the thing for a while. We'd shown it to some other publishers, and we'd gotten some good responses, and then some kind of like, we just don't quite know how to market the books, which is kind of funny to me because I feel like you just market it as an Alexis Ziritt comic.
Right.
But you know, we'd gotten some good reactions from people, and then Jason and I sent it to Jason because I saw him publishing, I guess what I would call like art house genre stuff, where, you know, he's doing Revenger, he's doing Slasher, he did Corey Lewis's Sun Bakery. He's putting out a lot of really cool boundary pushing work that doesn't feel confrontationally independent, because sometimes I feel like there is a tier in indie comics, which I personally really like, that are just inscrutable to an average human, where I feel like the work that Floating World publishes, because Jason has a really finely honed sense of taste, it is art house and it is avant-garde and it is slightly out on a ledge, but a normal person could walk in and not have to be steeped in like 20 years of outsider art, visual language to be able to kind of comprehend what is happening.
Yeah.
And that I feel like is a perfect spot for Night Hunters, because Night Hunters, like I said, the whole goal is to make like this weird mashup of like social satire and political statement, while still having it in this cool, action-packed Alexis Ziritt package.
Yeah.
And I feel like you know, Jason at Floating World and Floating World in general are both very, very supportive of that.
I also think, you know, if you're going to do this comic the right way, you're going to want somebody who's actually going to put good production value on it. And Floating World does a really good job with their books. Like they're really well produced.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, so I'm very excited about that.
So I actually, going back to like how this whole thing came together, I do think it's really fascinating because it's like, I think, if you ask your average comic fan how like a comic came together and they like guessed a bunch of different times, they wouldn't guess that it was just like a conversation where an artist created this character and then you guys built out from that. Does that, I mean, like when you're working on something like, let's say, Fuck Off Squad with Nicole, like how, like, I guess how different is that origin story versus something that you would like normally do?
I think every book kind of comes together in its own way.
Right.
But ironically, Fuck Off Squad came together almost the exact same way.
Of course.
Where Nicole was drawing this like teenage girl on a skateboard doing a kickflip.
Was that Jimmy?
I was like, oh, it wasn't, that drawing wasn't Jimmy, but it was basically Jimmy. And I was like, oh man, that drawing is really cool. We should do something with that. And she was like, all right, yeah, you want to make a comic? And I was like, yeah, let's make a like sad skater kid comic about like trying to be a human and being shitty at it. And she was like, all right, that sounds cool. And so from there, we kind of built out the trio of shitty skater kids in Fuck Off Squad based on we went to some skate parks and we just kind of hung out and watched and drew the skaters. And two, some of the kids in there are based off of the kids that I knew in high school who I hung out with, who may or may not have made not the best choices,
mm-hmm.
And like because I skated for a while and then I got really paranoid about breaking my wrist and I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I basically stopped. My sister got me into skating because she had a skateboard and then I was like, yeah, this is too dangerous. I don't want to do this anymore. And so we kind of like rolled all of those things up into one, and I wrote the first issue of Fuck Off Squad based on those conversations that Nicole and I had and the drawings that she had done of the various people at the skate park. Like Clark, the character in Fuck Off Squad of Clark is like, if there's ever a Fuck Off Squad show, that guy could probably sue us because he is 100% a real human who lives in Venice. He wasn't wearing a pirate's hat, but everything else about him was that guy. Like I think he was just wearing a red baseball hat. And I was like, oh, we should make it a pirate's hat.
I do like, this is like multiple baseball references. Are you a baseball guy?
I was as a kid. I played Little League and I got really into baseball for a while. And then I kind of drifted away from it. Just, I don't really know why. Same thing with basketball. I was really into the NBA for a long time. And then I kind of just was like, there came a point, David, where I was like, well, I got to choose. Am I going to play music? Because I played classical music for a long time. I competed in classical pianist competitions and I played Suzuki piano for like, I don't know, until I was like 16, 17, something like that, from like the age of like 5.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a point where it was like, all right, which path do I choose? Do I want to make movies? Because I made little movies with my friends when I was a kid. We had a camcorder. Do I make music? Because I did all that stuff and was in bands briefly and all that kind of shit. Or do I make comics?
Mm-hmm.
And oh boy.
Comics won. And also, let's be honest, like there's only so much time in a day, so it's like, how many things can you like love? I mean, like that's one of the things I come into conflict with is just like, sometimes I'm like, I wish I could play more video games. Video games are fun. And then I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to play video games, but I would love to.
Yeah. When I was younger, my ultimate goal was to be in the NBA, man. I was like, I'm going to be in the NBA and it's going to be amazing. And like sophomore year in high school, I was like, I am still pretty short. I'm not 7 feet tall. I don't think this NBA thing is going to happen.
I wanted to be a Major League Baseball pitcher. And the problem is I have a permanently dislocated right arm. And when I went to go to a doctor to be like, hey, what should I do about this? They're like, well, don't play baseball first off. And I'm like, shit. So that was immediately ruined. But I do think it is really interesting how like a single piece of art, like, Alexis drawing that character, Nicole drawing, one of the characters from Fuck Off Squad, or like the idea of one can lead into this like entire path. because, you know, like I was when we were at New York Comic Con, I was talking to Carl Kerschel and Brendan Fletcher about the origins of one of their comics that they did together. And they were talking about how, like, sometimes it just kind of comes from, like, just talking and, like, you know, one thing starting a conversation and then it going from there. And I don't know, I that's part of the reason why I love, you know, comics and storytelling in general, is just the fact that it can be, especially in comics, I guess, when it's like, you know, it can just be you and Nicole, or it can just be you and Alexis, where it's like it's built off of just this small group of people who have an idea together and want to blow it out, like you are with, you know, Night Hunters. I just think that's where the magic of comic lies in some ways.
Yeah, me too. I think there's a simplistic beauty to the fact that there's almost no barrier to entry with comics. Like, if you have a couple pieces of paper and a pencil, you can make a comic. And, you know, if you want it to be more complex and you want it to be full color, or you want it to have computer lettering, or you want it to be printed in a perfect bound form, you can take it that far. But a comic that's folded and stapled and drawn with a pencil is just as valid as something that's drawn on a Cintiq. And I think that there's something very liberating about that, and also very liberating about using, you know, crowdfunding and independent publishing and self-publishing. You know, like Nicole and I kickstarted did one of the volumes of Fuck Off Squad we did through Kickstarter. The second volume of Action Hospital I did through Kickstarter. And now this, you know, Alexis and I's Night Hunters is in conjunction with Floating World. We're running a Kickstarter for right now. And there's something to betting on yourself, and, you know, something I'm very passionate about is, like, owning my work.
Right.
Because so many people in comics, like, we're desperate for any sense of recognition and desperate for any sense of opportunity, that we're immediately just kind of giving away our intellectual property and our life's work, ostensibly. You know, Siegel and Schuster, they sold Superman for $130. And yes, I'm aware that it was a very different world, and yes, I'm aware that, you know, that business practices that caused them to sell Superman for $130 are not necessarily in effect anymore. But that's also not completely true. We just have a different type of gangsterism.
Right.
Like, we have all these companies coming in with, you know, foreign backing or movie money or, you know, pharmaceutical money, or I don't know, wherever these people are getting their Russian oligarch money.
Right.
I'm not singling out anybody in specific. I'm just saying, like, all these companies seem really shady to me. Like, where are they getting all this money, and why are we all giving them half of our ideas? Like, comics is the reason why it's the Wild West is because nobody stands up for themselves. There's no union to protect anybody, and everybody's willing to sacrifice this idea so that they can own tomorrow's idea. The problem is that they just end up sacrificing their ideas for years,
right,
so that they can own their next idea. And it's very disheartening to me on one level. And that's why I wanted to work with a publisher that we would own 100% of whatever we did. Like, that was basically, you know, I had one request and Alexis had one request. Alexis's request was, bro, I need to get paid because I have bills.
Right.
I was like, yeah, I get that. And my request was, I just want to own whatever we do. I want it to be 50-50 right down the middle. And so far, you know, if the Kickstarter is successful, which I hope it is, we will own the book 100%, and Alexis will be getting a page rate, and the book will be published, and it'll be in Barnes & Noble and comic book stores. And that's fucking crazy to me, David. Like, I can't tell you I can tell you the first time that Nicole and I went into a Barnes & Noble, it was in Burbank, and they had a Fuck Off Squad turned face out on the shelf. And my friend, I almost pooed myself. I was like, this is fucked up. I have made it. Look at this shit. I can die happy.
That's amazing. Well, I would do the same thing. I think that my library has a copy of Fuck Off Squad. I think I was in there last time. I was just like, wow, this is here. This is amazing. But I do want to ask.
Wait, in Alaska?
Yeah, Alaska, Anchorage Public Library has like a shockingly I mean, I think libraries are amazing in general in terms of comics, but our library system is amazing, and they have Duncan the Wonder Dog, like, which is like something that I would never have expected. Next time I go there, if I see it, I'll take a picture for you.
Yeah, please do. Wow, that's amazing. shout out to whoever the librarian is at the Anchorage, Alaska library. 'Cause that shit is lit, bro. Look at that shit. That's fucked up.
Well, so for Kickstarter, though, I mean, you've done this multiple times at this point, but is there like an added pressure that comes with doing a Kickstarter? Because, when you're doing a Kickstarter, you're having to promote it all the time. You're having to put yourself out there. And then on top of that, it's like, if it's like a Kickstarter that is like to literally publish the book, that's one thing. But sometimes people get really weird about the concept of people being paid for stuff. Like, is that something that you have like a nervousness about, or because you've done it before, it's a little bit negated?
I'm going to be brutally honest and say, fuck yeah, I'm nervous about that shit. Look, like the last two I ran, I was very conservative with. I had the book completely printed. I had it at the printer. I literally just needed to put the money in the paper machine and get the book out.
Right.
Like I was because I've seen those Kickstarters. We all know who I'm talking about. I've seen those Kickstarters that take years to give them people their books, or run Kickstarters to pay for other aspects of the Kickstarter that they hadn't necessarily thought through. Like I did not want to be a horror story like that. But after spending 2 years going around hat in hand trying to get somebody to make this book, the only way that I could foresee it happening with the various parameters that we had in place of, I want to own my work. Alexis he has a family. He needs money. He's doing everything. Like,
yeah.
We have a letterer. Robert Negretti is lettering the book. And Vanessa Del Rey painted over his layout for the cover. But other than that, the cover to issue 1. But other than that, Alexis is penciling, inking, and coloring this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And he even with the amount of money that we're trying to raise, he's still not going to make what he deserves.
Yeah.
But he's going to make enough so that he'll be able to keep his head above water while we're producing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it is very nerve-wracking, and it is very concerning. And no, I do not want to, get pie on my face.
Right.
But from my perspective, I would rather take a swing and a miss than live in a world of what ifs.
Yeah.
See our conversation about Toddy Mac, he's the one who went out when he was like, well, I don't really feel like I'm being treated fairly. I'm going to go do my own thing. Like, I'm aware of what some of these deals are. We've been offered some deals, some of which were good, some of which were not. But ultimately, the thing that made the most sense for us was to partner with Jason, who's been an incredible partner throughout this entire process, and for us to bet on ourselves and do it. Alexis is a workhorse, so I have no doubt this thing will get made. But it's just, he needs that runway to be able to make it. And I wish that everyone had a dedicated fan base the way he does, so that everyone could afford to get paid to make their work. I wish I had that. I wish that I had mountains of people lining up to see me get paid what I deserve to get paid to draw. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. Not yet, anyway.
So what is the end of a Kickstarter like after you finish? Because you said you've done 2 of these before. Like, is it just like, is there an enormous weight off of your shoulders, basically?
Well, yes, because I've only had Kickstarters that have succeeded.
Yes.
I'll let you know the crushing depths of despair that will happen if this doesn't succeed.
That's true. True.
But yes, for the ones that I've run, I have been very, very relieved when it is over. But it hasn't been the same thing, because the first one we ran for Fuck Off Squad, we ran it for Teenage Switchblade, which is the second chapter of Fuck Off Squad. I think that got funded in an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Granted,
that definitely reduces the stress.
Yeah, it really does. And I think Action Hospital got funded within the first few days. I don't remember what specifically it was, but it funded very quickly. So it was a bit different. This is, we're asking for a considerable amount of money. but it is the lowest amount of money that we can ask for and have the book get made. It's $20,000, which to me might as well be $1 million, because I am such a poor indie kid that I'm just like, oh God, that's so much money. But I feel like it's not just two schmucks out, stacked on top of each other wearing an extra long raincoat being like, no, we're adults.
Right.
Like, Alexis has a proven track record of delivering. I am a real human who's done things. Nicole and I just sold a book to Athenaeum, as you mentioned. And also, Jason has published a shitload of books, and so have I. I've published like 12 books. Like, we theoretically know everything, all the roadblocks that we're going to encounter, and we will plan accordingly. And I just really want to see this thing live. Like, I want this. I don't know if you've noticed, David, but the world hasn't been such a great place recently.
A little bit. Yeah, definitely noticed that. Even up here in Alaska.
Yeah, and I want to make a thing that is a reaction to that, but also hopefully can put a few smiles on a few faces.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make a cool Alexis Ziritt comic, and I hope that there are enough other people out there that want to see it, that it will exist. But if it doesn't, I think it'll be all right, and I think I'll find some way of making it happen, because come hell or high water, this fucking thing is getting
I do think, it can't be underrated, because you talked about like the occasional vaporware nature of Kickstarter comic projects, or really Kickstarter projects in general. I think it's meaningful that you have like an established track record of following through on this, and like Alexis has got plenty of work done, and Jason's what he is. But anyways, I think that's all hugely valuable. But to close, I actually want to talk a little bit about cons, just because I'm really interested to tie it into Night Hunters. Like, what is your, like, was that something you were actively pitching people on at the con? Like, did you have like a handout for that type of thing?
Oh yeah. We made bookmarks that had the cover for issue 1 on them, with the little high concept on the back, and link to the Kickstarter page. And basically, anytime someone was foolish enough to talk to me, the question after, hey, do you want to check out my comic, was, hey, do you want to check out my comic on Kickstarter?
Yes. It's the next step. It makes sense.
Yeah. Cons are great, man. That's the whole reason I know so many of my friends. It's the reason I know Alexis. Because you go to conventions, you make friends, you fuck around. I personally treat conventions like my own little personal vaudeville show. So I'm always out there tap dancing and doing little bits and shtick, which I'm sure some people don't find as funny, but I think it's funny.
I will say, I got to give you guys credit. You and Nicole seem to like you're always standing, which is like really rare at cons. Maybe I just walk by you when you happen to be standing, but that seems like, I don't know. Cons are exhausting, yet you guys are always up there. It's very fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, we definitely we have like best practices that we've A/B tested and know that they work. When you're standing eye level with somebody and you ask them how their day is going, and you ask them if they want to see your comic, and then you hand them your comic, the likelihood of them, leaving with your comic is significantly, increased.
Mm-hmm.
And also just being a nice person.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's a stressful environment. Not everybody in comics is conditioned to be in a room with 200,000 people, and bearing that in mind and just treating people like people and not like walking wallets is it goes a long ways. We do a lot of conventions, though. We do.
I was going to ask how many you do, like, because I as we talked about before, I've been to 2 cons this year, Emerald City Comic Con in New York, and you guys have been to both of them. And I know you did SPX. Like, how many do you do?
We do a lot. It kind of varies from year to year. Last year, I think we probably did like 20 something. The year before that, I think we did like 30 something. It was like we were like on the road, like 2 or 3 years ago. We were on the road what felt like every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I don't know if it actually was 40 something weeks out of that year, but man, it felt like 40 something weeks, because I would do all of the local conventions, and then Nicole and I would do I mean that only because so she had time to actually like draw the books,
Right.
And then we would both do all the travel shows, and we're talking like tiny ass like art walks and zine fests with 7 people and library shows where we're the only person tabling. We did a show once where it was in a renovated hotel,
Wow.
like a Marriott,
Yeah.
that had been turned into a like artist's workspace, and we were on like the 11th floor, and there were no signage so that anybody coming in or out of the renovated hotel knew that we were there. And it was like us and like 2 or 3 other air quotes makers, and man, that shit was brutal.
That is really bizarre. Like, did you have to stay, or did you just like bounce?
We stayed for a while. I kind of don't remember if we stayed the whole time or not because I was so grumpy. It's like being a road comedian or touring in a band. It's not if you have a bad show, it's a when. Like there just will be bad shows, and you just kind of grin and smile and don't let it get to you. And, and sometimes bigger shows are bad too, because you're just not the right fit.
Yeah.
Like Nicole and I are fortunate in that our creative interests kind of land in the middle of a bunch of Venn diagrams, but some people, they're staunchly on one end of the spectrum or the other. And if you put a guy drawing Deadpool at the LA Zine Fest, that shit's not going to work. And if you put a guy or a girl making, heartfelt personal zines about, the road trip they went on when they were 14 at, Fan Expo Toronto, that's not going to work either. So part of it is just kind of knowing your prospective audience and acting accordingly.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, I run a Facebook group for people who do conventions to know when convention deadlines are. And a lot of that has been very positive. Like I just started it, so it would be me and Nicole and a couple of our local LA friends, because we kept missing like Anime Expo or WonderCon or like these like local shows. And overnight it just ballooned, and like now there's like 1,200 people in there.
Wow.
And like people putting in links to shows all over the world. Like Nicole and I went to Thought Bubble in England because somebody posted the application in that group, and I just on a whim was like, fuck it, I'll apply for this. We're not gonna get in, but yeah, fuck it. And then we got in, and I was like, hey baby girl, you want to go to England? Yeah, it was pretty weird.
That is amazing, because like I think Thought Bubble's kind of like hard to get into. So good job by you.
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. It was a really fun convention. I got to meet a whole bunch of friends that I'd never met because they live literally on the other side of the world, and I got to make a lot of new friends. It was really cool. And if anybody listening to this is a creator and they want to utilize the resource as well, please come and hang out. The name of the group is Let's Do All the Conventions.
I love it.
Yeah, it's really easy. It's a closed group only so that, like, spam and weird shit doesn't get put in there. But it's not really a closed group. Like, if you have anything in your profile that looks like you have anything to do with comics, you just get approved.
It's funny because this is actually where I wanted to finish. The one thing I think is really interesting about cons, especially for you guys, is like, I mean, you guys are always next to Andrew McLean, which I think is really funny, and like, but at the same time, like probably intentional. Like I don't know about how these things are done, but like I think it's like 3 straight cons I've seen you guys at. You just happen to be parked next to Andrew McLean, and I'm guessing that's because of request. But do you like? How important is it to have like a peer group for those shows and for making comics in general? Because it seems like so much of like your, support group, but also like, you talked about Alexis, you met him at a con. Like those are where you find your people. Those are where you find the people who keep pushing you forward. How important is that for you, both you and I guess you probably don't want to speak for Nicole, but for you guys as creators?
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong. The little crew that we always hang out with is like Andrea Bell, Andrew McLean, JB Rowe, Buster Moody, Caleb Gollner, Alexis Ziritt, Vanessa Del Rey. Like, there's a little like click, and I think from the outside, in certain instances, comics can look very cliquish in a negative way, and kind of like, oh, how do I get in?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that firsthand, because
Right.
I personally felt that for years. Like, all I wanted to do for a really long time was just be a dude in the scene. I wanted to be making my book. I wanted to have a couple friends, and I wanted to be somebody, 100 years from now, when there's an art history class about, the post-millennium comics movement, because in my daydreams, comics are taught in art history classes the same as every other artistic medium. Like, I wanted to be a footnote in that conversation. And whether I am or am not a footnote yet, I don't know. But I definitely have friends, and we all make comics together, and we push each other to be better, and we all love the medium, and we all want to see each other succeed. And that comics is a really lonely, isolating thing, man. The industry doesn't take care of you. The people in positions of power 9 times out of 10 treat you like you're disposable. And I'm not speaking from personal experience. I'm just saying I have eyes,
Right.
and I've seen how they've treated people like Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and Grant Morrison and Brian Bendis and all of these people that are empirically like pillars of the industry, and they've been mistreated at various points in time. And I'm not foolishly naive enough to think that'll never happen to me or my friends. And that's why it's so important to have a scene, to have a support structure, to have a adopted family that will look out for you, and they'll tell you when you're fucking up, and they'll tell you when you're doing a good job. And I really value that. And it's kind of a bizarre thing, specifically because all of my friends that are the closest people to me now, they live like literally all over the country. It's really weird. Like, it's beautiful, but it's also really weird, because you're like, hey, you want to hang out tonight? Oh, you can't. You live in fucking like Kansas City.
Right.
You know?
Oh, believe me, I know that. I'm in Alaska. Every time I talk to somebody in comics, I'm just like, they're like, oh, are you going to go to this? I'm like, I can't, because that is like 18 hours away from me flying. I mean, it's just, I don't know. That is one of the interesting things, is like it's wonderful how cons like bring everybody together, and then it's like the internet keeps us together still, but it's like, so, I don't know. It's amazing, but also, I don't know. It's an interesting experience.
It's exactly like comics, man. It's bittersweet.
Yeah. I will say, one of the funny things about having a podcast, though, is whenever I do go out into the world, there's 2 things that happen. One, like when people recognize me by voice, that's always really entertaining to me, because I'm just like, apparently I have a recognizable voice. And then the other thing is like, because I live in Alaska, and I'm just like, it's me and some moose and like an abominable snowman up here. It's like, whenever people meet me, there's always like something about me that they're really surprised by. Like, the most often thing I get is like, I'm a lot younger than people expect, which I find really amusing. I'm like, do you guys just imagine I'm old? Is that what's going on with comics? Am I just like some old man because of my podcast? I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny too, because like the social aspect of comics is something that when you're not at a convention, you really miss.
Yeah.
Which is actually, that's one of the reasons why I started my book club. No one should know this, but I run a bi-weekly X-Men comic book meetup and discussion group called To Me, My Book Club.
Oh my God, I love it. That is awesome.
Where, we've been doing the Hickman stuff, and we have to now decide, now that it's, coming to a close, if we're going to start with the new books, or if we're going to read just the flagship, adjectiveless book, or if we're going to do, we've also talked about like going back and like starting at the Claremont stuff and reading a couple issues every week and getting together to talk about it. I don't know what we're going to do yet, but it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the Hickman run so far, but don't say anything about these last 2 issues, because I haven't read either number 6 of either series. I
won't. That would be very vile of me. I actually put everything on mute. It's funny how that works. It's like, this is like the first time in like a really long time in comics that I've actually cared about spoilers enough to try to avoid the conversation. Like, normally I'd just be like, whatever, if you want to tell me like who Batman punched or whatever, I'm like, I don't give a shit. But for this, I'm like, don't tell me anything. Like, I just don't want to know.
Yeah. I've been the same way, and I'm a huge X nerd. And the last couple eras of X-Men, I think they have their fan bases, and that's cool. They just didn't really do it for me. But this era so far I'm just like hook, line, and sinker, and I'm so ready for Daddy Hickman to hurt me again.
Is that an in-person club?
Yeah, we meet every
that's
Sunday.
I love that.
Or every other Sunday, yeah.
So in Alaska, we have this like this one artist got a group together for like artists and like zine makers and stuff like that. That's going to meet every single month up here. And I was actually invited to it, and I was just like, "Are you sure you want to invite me? Like, I don't actually make anything." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, come on." So they did the first one when I was at New York, but. I'm gonna go next month. I love when people get like these in-person groups together. Like it's kind of like, you know, it's an extension of the con experience. It's like it's good to have people that can, you know, you can, I don't know, lean on, people you can talk to, people who have common experiences and stuff like that. Even if it is just about the X-Men.
I mean, look, man, it's a really fun time talking about comics. I mean, even when the comics are bad, I like talking about comics.
Oh yeah,
like. I don't mean that in like I like shitting on comics, because I find that really tiresome. I don't really understand that like whole subculture of Twitter where people buy comics to rip them up and like be really angry about them.
Yeah, it's weird. But you can learn a lot.
Yeah. I mean, from reading a bad comic, yes, I definitely. I mean, look, there's a whole trope to be had right now of people writing comics that are all just wall to wall narration captions. Like, we don't even need to go down that rabbit hole, but I mean, like, it's just like there's a lot of stuff I don't like, and some of it I talk about, and some of it's just like, is there really a point to screaming about this into the void? I don't know. No, probably not. But you can continue screaming into the void about Night Hunters, at least for the next 14 days. Hey!
But Dave, this has been great. Thank you so much. That's all the questions I have. Best of luck with the rest of the Kickstarter and everything else that's coming up.
Thank you. Yeah, please head over to Kickstarter and back Night Hunters. You just give it a little searchy search under Night Hunters. It's real easy to find.
All right, here I am with New York Comic Con edition of Big Clutch's Beast of the Week. This is a shout out to Sean Kirkham, Big Clutch, for a special segment for my Patreon. And this week, the Beast of the Week comes with a special guest. It's John Hendrick of Big Bang Comics. John, who is your Beast of the Week? New York Comic Con edition.
The New York Comic Con edition?
Yeah.
That's a weird title, but anyway, because surely it shouldn't matter whether we're at New York Comic Con or not.
Okay, this is just all-time Beast of the Week. Who is your all-time Beast of the Week?
Our guy, Big Clutch, Sean Kirkham.
So we're doing a Big Clutch Beast of the Week for Big Clutch himself?
This is really confusing.
So why is Sean Kirkham the Beast of the Week?
Because he's our guy. He's the one person that has all the retailers' backs all the time. He does a lot of work behind the scenes. He helps everybody out. Often without us having to chastise him or scream at him, he'll just do it. He's a good guy.
And for me, that he helps out people who are in need, and I really appreciate it. Sean is always there for all of us in comics.
He totally is.
And he loves Wildstorm comics.
He does, and Wildstorm cards, and I have a full set.
You have a full set?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I don't know how to play the game. I never did. But I have a folder, a full binder. I even have the 3 promo cards that came with Wizard magazine. Well, I had to buy 3 Wizards.
See, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to get Sean Kirkham on the podcast, and we can do a Wildstorm podcast to fully celebrate the Beast of the Week. But Sean Kirkham is our Beast of the Week. Do you have anything else to say to shout out Sean?
You're very nice. Thank you very much.
We love you, Sean.
We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Big Clutch.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Dave Baker. You can find Baker on Twitter at xDaveBakerX, on his website at heydavebaker.com, and his writing in the currently being Kickstarted Night Hunters. Get on backing Night Hunters ASAP, as it's wrapping very, very early on October 24th. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow it on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Andrew Nikovich, Nathan House, Alex Mitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Clip Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallrun, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comic Star in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Op Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.